The bell tolls. The midnight hour is upon us. It's time once again for two internet strangers to discuss the good and evil of the horror genre. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the terror within the Hallow-Holics Anonymous podcast.
I guess I'm going to go with my first favorite episode from Season 3, Episode 2, Carrion Death.
Oh, so good.
Yes.
So, an escaped convict played by the absolutely gorgeous Kyle MacLachlan tries to avoid both a cop and a vulture who are chasing him across a scorching desert, co-starring George Deloy as the policeman. I just love the irony of this episode. At the opening, it gets straight to the meat of the story, so there's plenty of time for the chase. From the shootout to the shot of the sign that there's no pit stop for 70 miles in the desert, to the announcement on the radio about him being on the run. And it just has the best ending. The makeup is just deliciously dark and convincing. Now, you could argue that this episode isn't strictly horror, it's more cat and mouse with a hint of Western, but it works so well.
Yes, agreed.
I personally think if an undead corpse is animated and introducing the episode, it falls in the horror genre. So I think this is fine.
Check and mate, Corey.
No, I'm a giant Kyle MacLachlan fan. I'm a huge Twin Peaks fan. He was great in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. that season he got to be in. I just really like him. And he never really gets to play the bad guy. He was cast normally as the clean-cut good guy. Even in his David Lynch stuff, in Blue Velvet, he was very clean-cut, normal dude. And it was nice to see him able to really let loose and be the bad guy and be that much of a sociopath. I feel like he took a piece of this character with him to the new season of Twin Peaks as well. It was a really great role, and that cop was so over-the-top, badass cop. I loved it.
Yeah.
The cop really is what makes it feel like a Western to me.
Yeah, like when he dumped out that bag of money because he didn't care.
Yeah, and he just wanted to hurt MacLachlan's character.
When I see the cop, I just imagine Terminator 2, you know?
Yeah, I actually thought it was Robert Patrick when I started watching it the other day. I'm like, wait, is that Robert Patrick? Because you don't actually see his face really at all, do you?
No,
I don't think he takes the sunglasses off. I forget.
I'm not sure he takes off his sunglasses.
He doesn't actually take them off himself, but like during the altercation he has in that abandoned restaurant, you know, the glasses come off and then you can actually see his face.
Okay.
But like, you know, not personally does he take them off.
Have y'all seen the movie Highway to Hell?
Oh, I love Highway to Hell.
The cop makes me think of Hell Cop so much.
Yeah, that's definitely, I can see that. It's definitely a template for Hell Cop. That's the one, with the poor man's Luke Skywalker, Mark Hamill. The poor man's Mark Hamill is the main character.
I need to pull up his name because I always forget it. I love that actor. It's Chad Lowe, Rob Lowe's brother.
Oh, there you go.
Didn't realize he had a brother. I thought he was just an only child.
He's been in a few things. You'd probably recognize him if you saw him, but Highway to Hell is just a fantastic example of to a T the heroic cycle. This is way off topic, but if you haven't seen it, you really need to see it. A man's girlfriend gets kidnapped and taken to hell, and he goes on this epic heroic journey to rescue her. And it's just so great. It's so 80s. It's got Ben Stiller and his parents. It's got Patrick Bergin, Christy Swanson. It's so good.
There's a bumper sticker in it at one point that says Pontius is my co-pilot. It's so brilliant.
There's so many bad jokes. There's like this one point where a bunch of Andy Warhols are paving the road in hell, and like
I forgot about that.
you see the cement mixer, and it's these people climbing down this line, and at one point this woman's like, well, I was only sleeping with all those men for my husband to get a promotion, and then they push her into the mixer because the path to hell is paved with good intentions.
Oh, that sounds fun, actually. I'm actually going to have to look into that. I'm already writing it down.
It's pretty great.
Back to my episode, though.
Yeah.
Yes. Off subject.
It is set in a desert, though, so I will say that. If he hadn't, he played Kyle MacLachlan. His character's name was Diggs. If he'd only have been a little smarter, he might have made it to Mexico. No person who saw a sign fallen in the desert like that would have thought that place was still open. Nor would he have not immediately tried to cut that key out of the cop's stomach, or at least cut his hand off before he walked 5 miles with the guy slung over his back.
Exactly. Me personally, I would have been like, okay, I think I'm going to cut this dude's hand off or find some way to get it disconnected from mine in order to walk the rest of this distance here to Mexico. That's not happening.
Yeah, this is life or death. I would chew through that cop's wrist. Hydrating on blood the whole time. Like, yeah, I mean, if I'm a convict, the rules of society don't apply to me. I get to be who I really am. I'm chewing through a dude's wrist.
Maybe he just wanted someone to talk to on the way.
I mean, he was talking to him.
Yeah, even that could have been super cheesy and really poorly done, but that worked really well, too, in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you're starting to dehydrate and you need some kind of company, I mean, I guess that would work.
Yeah.
And it just seems to me, looking back on my childhood, this was the episode that played on TV the most frequently as a rerun.
Yeah, I remember seeing this one more than every other one.
I didn't even know that.
Again, I really love the effects in this. I love how they do the broken neck. I love how they do the eyeballs being ripped out. I love how the way they stage his hand, like just ripping off of his wrist. It's so good.
I don't know if you guys know this. The special effects artist that worked on the entire series and most of the films, Todd Masters.
Really?
Yes, so he's responsible for most of the special effects for the series.
I didn't know that was him.
And for the benefit of the listeners, and I'm not specifically saying myself, but can you give us an example of some famous things Todd Masters has also worked on?
I don't really know extensively his resume, but I just know for a fact that I think he's worked on Hellraiser at one point.
I know he did Slither.
He did True Blood as well.
Oh, really?
So he did True Blood. Now I have to look him up. True Blood's as far as I know. Oh, Carnival, so he must have been in the HBO ecosystem for a while. I did some stuff for 6 Feet Under, Leprechaun 2. Yeah.
The best in the Leprechaun series.
He worked on my favorite, Howling. He worked on The Freaks.
Howling 6, The Freaks.
Yep. It's my favorite.
He's also done 30 Days of Night.
Oh, that was a good vampire design too. I liked how he sort of took them to a whole new species. That was cool.
I think those vampires would be 10 times more intimidating if not for all the damn monologuing.
Yeah, there is a lot of monologuing.
That was Carrion Death. And so, one last note, which actually, never mind, no last notes because I already mentioned the effects. Corey, what's your first favorite episode?
I think that my first favorite, I'm going to go with Dig That Cat, He's Real Gone.
Yes.
Starring Joe Pantoliano.
Amazing actor.
Yeah, for sure.
I loved him in Matrix.
Yeah, he was great in The Matrix. He was great in the season of Sopranos he was in. He's just a great actor. But this episode is told through a flashback by Ulrich the Undying, played by Joe Pantoliano. I'm going to screw that up every time I say it. So let me try that one more time.
Try saying it 5 times fast.
Yeah. This episode is told through a flashback by Ulrich the Undying, played by Joe Pantoliano, as he's being buried alive. Turns out he was a homeless dude found by some doctor who, by implanting a gland from a cat into his brain, gives him 9 lives. The doctor then shoots him to prove this is a reality. And he wakes up all freaked out. Once he calms down, the doctor and him decide that they're going to use these lives in a carnival show, a limited run carnival show, since he only has 9 lives. So he's going to die over and over again and get paid for it. This consists of him being drowned and being hanged, until he eventually decides he isn't getting enough of the profits. It's a 60-40 split favoring the Doctor. So he decides to use one of his lives to crash his car and kill the Doctor. And that is the fourth death. This is important later. And then it's back to the real show where he's electrocuted by a way too enthusiastic old lady and shot with a crossbow by an expert marksman that just happens to be in the crowd. What was he, the so-and-so county fair 1987 marksman champion or something like that?
Yeah.
And then his girlfriend, in a very Tales from the Crypt fashion, decides that she wants all his money and literally stabs him in the back and runs off with his winnings. But all is not lost. He's got one more death to die before he can live the life of his dreams in comfort. He somehow makes a deal with the head carny. I forget that actor's name. He was also in another HBO show called Arliss, which was good. He's an excellent comedic actor, and he was great as the announcer. He was just chewing the scenery the whole time.
Robert Wool?
Robert Wool, there you go. Anyway, somehow he makes a deal that he will be taking all the winnings for his final performance, and it's going to be televised, and he's going to be buried alive. But the twist is he's forgotten one very important thing. The cat died on the operating table, therefore robbing him of one of his lives. So he's fresh out and suffocates to death in his grave. So Ulrich, throughout the movie, is kind of a dick, but he's generally not a bad guy until he murders the Doctor. But on the Tales from the Crypt scale of dickery, this barely ranks, so I guess he gets what he deserves in the end. This episode, to me, is about two things. It's about how money corrupts and how our culture is obsessed with death, violence, and terrible things happening to other people. You can see this in the excitement in the old lady's face when she pulls the switch, and in the quiet sort of wish fulfillment look in the marksman's eyes as he takes up the crossbow and hands over his check to shoot Ulrich. Speaking of money, it gives Ulrich an ego that is probably what leads his girlfriend to literally stabbing him in the back and taking all his money. She probably tired of putting up with him, but wasting one of his lives and running off is kind of a shitty thing for her to do. The only two characters that money didn't really corrupt are the Doctor, because he was more into the science. It was more of he wanted the money, but he wanted it for more experiments, and the Carney, because that dude was corrupted years ago, so it's just who he is. This was actually directed by Richard Donner, who does a really decent job creating this highly stylized, almost cartoony world with the budget he's given. You can see you can see some Goonies in this movie. He's really good at comedic stuff and comedic timing. He did Lethal Weapon, Superman 2. So yeah, that's dig that cat. He's real gone.
I do wonder if they had considered whether or not the Doctor could just replace that gland with another cat's gland, and they could have made more profit after that.
Yeah, I think about that every time I see this episode. And who knows, maybe the Doctor was working on that before he was murdered.
That was something that I had also thought about, and when I came to the thought of it, I was just like, maybe they just could have removed the previous gland and just switch it out with a new one and just keep Ulrich going. But it makes me feel like it could be done, but then again, you wouldn't have the just desserts ending that the show provided for us.
Yeah.
Right. And that's it could be explained away as pretty invasive surgery too. There's only so many times you can dig around in somebody's brain before you mess something up.
Yeah, like removing their souls, and then your friend comes back with a broken neck, and it's just all kinds of trouble.
Right, just a big mess.
And it shows that not even Ulrich had thought about something like that, considering he'd killed the Doctor, preemptively. So, I think that actually complements the story and the characters themselves, because if we did get something like that, then basically the episode would never end.
Right. That's true.
It makes you wonder if cat glands are the cure for cancer, though, because if cancer kills you the first time and you come back, do you still have cancer?
Probably. Well, I don't know, because he does heal. He does heal from everything, so maybe that would be a cure for disease as well. I also really like when his soon-to-be girlfriend asks him out as he's drowning in that pipe tube or tank. Yeah, that was hilarious. She wrote, you can actually see him trying to read Dinner Tonight backwards on the tank. It was such a great scene.
I don't know why it is, but that actress, just the way she was, her accent and the way she was acting, it kind of reminded me of Harley Quinn. I don't know what it is, but
Yeah, I think it's the voice.
The sort of ditzy Valley Girl.
Yeah.
But she's the only one that makes it out of the episode and with any sort of profit. I guess Robert Wuhl's character does as well, the Carney, but
I'm pretty sure he ended up having to explain to the cops what happened. In terms of Joe Pantoliano's character, so I messed it up too. But
yeah, it's a hard one, man.
Yes, it is. But in terms of Ulrich, I just love how his character developed. I mean, we just see how he tries to take advantage of this opportunity that he has with the 8 lives. And, he goes from being a homeless hobo, and then he decides to try to cash in on these lives. And then all of a sudden he's trying to make this big amount of money by the last one. And then all of a sudden he comes to this revelation within the casket, and he's just like, oh, shit. And then that's when everything starts going wrong.
Yeah, like he just started out like a guy who wanted to improve his life by dying a few times and making money off of it, and then that money corrupted him, and we get what we got from the middle of the episode to the end.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is definitely a good case of Tales from the Crypt giving somebody exactly what they deserve.
Let's move on to your second favorite episode, Jonathan.
Yes, my second favorite episode was Lower Birth from season 2. In case you haven't noticed, I have a real passion and love for the earlier seasons because I feel like they have that feeling of Tales and what they should be. So Lower Birth was from season 2, episode 20. And it was originally published in Tales from the Crypt number 33. It stars Louis Arquette, Stefan Garash, Mark Rolston, and Jeff Yeager, who Jeff Yeager is actually the brother of Kevin Yeager, the man who created the Crypt Keeper puppet and the Chucky puppet, the Chucky doll from Child's Play. Kevin Yeager has also done a lot of work on other films. He's done work on Hellraiser, I believe it was 3. He's done Nightmare on Elm Street 3. And then he's also done Sleepy Hollow, the one with Johnny Depp.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Say what you will about Hellraiser 3, but the effects are pretty great in that.
Well,
Yes,
yeah.
and-
Terrible movie,
Yes.
but...
Kevin Yeager was the contributing artist on most of those films.
It's amazing how many people cut their teeth with this show just throughout.
Yeah. With Lower Birth, it's basically, the episode is completely revolving around the birth of the Crypt Keeper. That's what it is mainly about. However, we're given the backstory as to how it happened. So I believe, if I recall, the story is set within the 1940s. And
Yeah, it's either the 30s or the 40s. It's definitely like either during the Dust Bowl era of the carnival or just after it. I'm a amateur carnival freak, so I love this kind of thing. This is another reason this is one of my favorites, because I love the carnival, and that's why I like Dig That Cat so much too. Anyway, sorry, go on.
No, you're not supposed
Yeah, I do.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there you go. Fire eater.
Yeah, you seem like a fire eater to me.
Yeah, not with this beard, but I can do it.
You know what? That would actually be pretty cool. You just, eating fire and blowing it out from your beard. I'd like to see that.
I'd probably catch it on fire.
Probably don't want to do that on the podcast, though.
Does anybody smell burning hair? But yes, back to the story. It's set in the 1940s, and we see a carnival setting, and we see that there is a man named Mr. Feely, who is in charge of an oddity called Enoch, the Two-Faced Man. While the carnival is set to, present Enoch for its show, the audience gathers around his cage, and then he turns out that he's not even there. And eventually we see that Mr. Feely is trying to punish Enoch for not showing up for his show. Eventually, the owner, I believe his name is Mr. Rickles. Actually, I don't recall the owner's name at this moment, but the owner is told at some point by a doctor that is in charge of Enoch, checking on Enoch, that Enoch is dying. Mr. Feely tries to keep this hidden from the owner. That way he doesn't get cut out from the show, and then he loses profit.
Mr. Sickles.
Yeah, Mr. Sickles. There you go. Mr. Sickles tries to keep this information from the owner, and then eventually he's just like, you know what? I'm going to cut you out of the show anyway unless you come up with a better oddity. And then here comes this doctor/scientist who comes around, and he offers Mr. Sickles an opportunity with his latest acquisition from a poker game. And he reveals Myrna, the Egyptian mummy. And it's with this that he's like, okay, listen, I see you prefer a lower birth, and here's what's going to happen. if you provide me a split on the profits, I'm going to provide you Myrna for your show. And that way you can collect the profit, I collect the profit of whatever you earn, and then we'll all be happy. And so Myrna becomes part of the attraction, and eventually everything's going well at first until Mr. Sickles realizes, after reading a newspaper article that is found in Enoch's cage, that the Egyptian mummy, Myrna, is actually stolen from a boat. And it just how happens that he confronts the poker player and the scientist, saying, okay, I know what you really did. I want you to fess up. And then he starts telling him, listen, okay, yes, I did steal Myrna. I did steal this Egyptian mummy from the boat. But here's the thing. You cannot take the jewelry that's all around her neck, because if you do, you're going to get castrated. You know, if you take the jewels, you will lose yours, essentially. And he was like, yes, listen, I hired somebody to try to take those diamonds off of Myrna, but it turned out that he was rendered from the bottom down. And he's trying to continuously warn Mr. Sickles, but then eventually Mr. Sickles takes a pair of shears and stabs the doctor. And eventually he's just like, okay, now I get full profit. But now, because of Enoch's going to be getting ready to die, and Myrna is basically useless because, she's, a stolen oddity. He tries to steal the diamonds from her neck, but Enoch, has developed feelings for Myrna, and he's very passionate about Myrna, and he wants to be with her, which, Mr. Sickles mocks him about. And, eventually, as he's trying to take the jewels from her, Enoch finds the same shears that he stabbed the doctor with, and then he castrates his owner, Mr. Sickles. And then Myrna comes to life, and then the scene blacks out. I believe it said a year later from that point on, police officers come to confront the owner of the carnival, and they tell them, listen, we realized that you had a previous incident that happened a year ago, and we just want to let you know that we had a follow-up on those lost oddities of yours from your carnival. A boy gave the police a heads up and a tip on where to find Enoch and Myrna, and then it just so happens that the owners led to a very deep, dark cave. Me personally, I believe this is the early version of the Crypt that we see now. Everyone, comes into the cave and they see Enoch and Myrna asleep together. Me personally, I think that they're actually dead, but and that's how they died. They fell asleep together in their arms, and that's how they died.
Well, I mean, technically she was already dead, but
yeah, she was dead.
I think you're right.
Unbeknownst to them, they leave the cave, and they'd have no idea what was left behind from Enoch and Myrna. And then a slow camera pan up, we see the Crypt Keeper as a baby. I enjoyed this episode because of the Crypt Keeper's backstory. I have a huge passion for the Crypt Keeper's development as a character and as a animatronic puppet. So this was one of my favorite episodes, basically due to having to find out his history and what he was before he became the Crypt Keeper.
I can see why Enoch fell in love with that mummy, because honestly, for a 4,000-year-old mummy, she looked pretty good.
Yeah, she was well preserved.
Yeah, she was. She was not just a stiff.
I like this episode a lot, too, because it's it's the only time we see what I interpreted as actual emotion coming from the Crypt Keeper. At the end, yeah, he's laughing in between it, but those are real tears he's shedding when he's thinking about his mummy, and I thought that was really cool. And it also kind of explains why he is the way he is. I mentioned this in chat, but I'll mention it again here. But yeah, like his dad spent his entire life in this freak show, getting beaten and living in a cage. His mother is a mummy he was basically born from a mentally disabled circus freak and a dead woman, and spent his life feral in a cave or a tomb. So of course he's going to deal with that with dark humor and be kind of a lunatic sociopath murderer. The
mummy was my mommy.
Exactly. It was so perfect.
You do an amazing voice.
Thank you. Like, trust me. Like, I have a better time doing the earlier seasons of the Crypt Keeper than I do with the later seasons. So I take pride in that. But I agree 100%. Of course, we don't actually get to see how he grows up and what makes him so attracted to dark humor and why he wants to be the way he is. It just seems so natural for him to be that way. Me personally, it's sort of like the Joker, from the Batman franchise, where you kind of see what his origin's like, but you don't really see what makes him that way, which is what I love.
Right. Yeah, you get options with the Joker, and you kind of have that here too.
Well, you get options with Two-Face too, but I didn't have
Enoch like that.
I didn't have anything to finish that with.
When it came down to the production of this episode, Kevin Yeager, he even directed the episode too. So not only did he create the Crypt Keeper and the Two-Face Enoch mask that his brother wore, he even directed the episode. This was an episode that he took great pride in because he also directs the Crypt Keeper segments throughout the entire series.
Mm-hmm. So, I didn't catch that. That's cool.
Yeah, Kevin Yeager, anything involving the Crypt Keeper directly with the segments or the episode Lower Berth, he took great pride in and directing it. He also directed Strung Along in one of the later episodes.
Well, he did a phenomenal job with this episode.
Yes. And if you guys ever notice, like throughout each season, you see the Crypt Keeper progressively look different, right? Mm-hmm. And that's because progressively through each season, through its ratings, through HBO's ratings and whatnot, they were like, okay, this show is a hit. We need to throw more money at these guys. And then they threw more money at Kevin Yeager and said, we want to see more articulation in the puppet. We want to see him actually mouth the words a little better. So with that money, he was able to give more, if you forgive the expression, lifelike qualities to the Crypt Keeper. Yeah. And John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper, he wasn't at first able to bring that delivery that he brings us in the later seasons with the first few seasons because of the way the puppet couldn't move as fast. So that's when he started doing the whole deep, raspy voice for the first and second season. Until third season and the fourth season, that's when we actually see John Kassir's true natural delivery with his lines and his personality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I noticed that change, but I didn't know that was why. That's really cool.
So I guess it's time for the next episode.
Yes.
I had a lot of trouble picking my second favorite episode because Yellow is definitely worth mentioning because it was the most cinematic episode in the series.
Yeah, I nearly picked Yellow too.
It's an hour long, exactly. Yeah. But I decided instead to go with the pilot episode because it has and I know I say this every epised that I have a different favorite actor every week, but one of my favorite actors, Bill Sadler, I went with The Man Who Was Death. He's
so good in this.
Yeah, this was
he was
directed and co-written by Walter Hill, who actually did produce and executive produce several episodes. An executioner with a narrative passion for his job and the thrill of a good vault takes justice into his own hands when he finds himself out of a job. This is actually one of the episodes based off of the Tales from the Crypt comics, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I'm kind of astonished that I love this episode so much because I really hate narrators who don't seem to shut up. Odd Thomas, I'm looking at you. But it worked really well for this episode. Bill Sadler just brought a lot to it. It was just fun to watch him chew the scenery.
Yeah, and that accent was a lot of the reason I think the narration worked as well. It was just such a good... His whole monologue about being a country boy but loving the city was so great.
Yeah. And it's funny, too, because in Tales from the Crypt issue 17, where that story is actually featured, there is no narration. the characters are not even remotely the same in terms of like what you see in comparison between the series and the comic. But what Bill Sadler brought to it was like all of its own. And, they, I forget which executive producer headed that. I think it was Walter Hill. When they auditioned him, they said, we will only hire you if you bring it the way you just did in this audition. So that's why he got hired for that episode.
And he kind of became a Tales from the Crypt legacy. Like, he's all over.
Oh, yeah.
He's in both movies.
They seem to really enjoy having him.
Especially when you bring the Reaper from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure on it. Like, that was a great Easter egg.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that they recycled the one sort of storyline with the Crypt Keeper and him fighting each other as both a mummy, or they used that in an episode and a movie, didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
A lot of people don't notice that, but yes, they did.
The only reason I know they did is because the first time I saw it, I'm like, wait a second, I swear I've seen this before. I'm like, no, I'm just being a moron. And then I finally stumbled across the episode again. I'm like, oh, no, I didn't just make up something dumb in my head. That really happened.
No, you did not. Definitely not.
I really wish I had more to say about this episode, but I think I've said everything I can. It's just really good.
Yeah, it's sort of it's a difficult episode because I don't really know if the dude got what he deserved. I mean, he's obviously a sociopath. You know what I mean? He definitely murders without a care or concern, but he murders people that deserve it, you know? And I mean, he liked his job, and they kicked him out of it, and he tried to get his old job back. They wouldn't give it to him. So what's an executioner to do? You know, he's going to go vigilante. That's his only choice. And I guess at least it wasn't decent people he was killing. I kind of wish that he would have gone to the electric chair with a little more grace. I understand why they did it. It was to juxtapose his monologuing in the beginning.
Exactly.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I would have liked him to be a little more. I would have liked to see that cool country boy go out rather than this kind of the governor's going to call thing.
The governor's going to call.
It would have been funny if they had walked him slowly there and he was still monologuing to the camera while they were leading him.
Yeah.
So you see what's happening? Exactly what happened to me, to the other guy in the beginning of the episode. That's exactly what's happened to me.
You remember trying to live better, don't you?
Yeah.
Ry Cooter did the music. Ry Cooter did the music for this episode too. Great blues man.
The music is
he did a really good song. Yeah. Yeah, season 7. We don't even need to talk about that.
Season.
Yeah. I was going to say one more thing. Oh, did he narrated even after his death in this, right? This was...
Yeah, something along the lines of, they told me I should get a haircut, but I told them, don't need to worry. Governor gonna
call.
Yeah, there's a recurring theme in Tales from the Crypt about your consciousness being locked inside you even after you're dead. I'll talk about it. Or wait, did I already talked about? No, I didn't.
No, you didn't.
Oh, I'll talk about it in my hate episode. But this is what started it all. This is what started that philosophy that when you die, you're just locked in your body.
I do think it's funny that since serial killers are such narcissists, that he's so narcissistic he has to narrate everything, because that pretty much nails the profile of the perfect serial killer right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes me think of Patrick Bateman in American Psycho.
So you see, today I'm eating a sandwich at this cafe. Sandwich is a lot like life. You got your tomatoes, your whores, your lettuce.
That's really good. But what you were saying about the overall recurring theme of being trapped in consciousness even when you're dead, that's definitely seen within You Murderer.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'll cover that at length and probably very sarcastically. I forget what I wrote.
I'm kind of jealous you picked that episode for your hate episode, honestly.
Well, I deserve it because I saw that the night it premiered, and I had been excited. But again, we'll talk about that when it's my turn.
Yes.
Man Who Is Death is a very, very good episode. And even as a pilot, it's pretty impressive. It's still kind of unpolished, like any pilot episode of any show is, where it doesn't really match the theme of the rest of the series, but it's so good that you can kind of look past that.
You know what the weird thing was is that The Man Who Was Death was actually set to be a pilot episode, but when you look at the first 3 episodes of season 1, the episode numbers change. So The Man Who Was Death was actually broadcasted as the first episode, but is actually considered episode number 2. And Dig That Cat, He's Real Gone is actually considered episode number 1. And All Through the House is actually episode 3.
Oh, I forgot all about it. All Through the House. That one's great too.
You know, if either of y'all, and I know you haven't, have watched the show Big Wolf on Campus, there's a lot of a sort of contentious debate in the fan community there about how the episodes are organized because the way the makeup changes, and it's such a serialized show that you can interchange most of the episodes between each other. People argue what order to play the episodes in, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and it happens a lot. It happened with Firefly. They showed that all out of order.
It's just it's one of those things where the fandom and the fans control in their minds what the proper order is, you know?
I'm a chronological guy myself. I watch everything as chronologically as possible.
Yeah, I prefer that mode too.
I'm kind of the same way. Anyway, let's move on to the next episode. Corey, what's your second favorite episode of the series?
My second favorite is your hate episode, Maddie.
Here we go.
Yeah. So
wait, before we get into that, let's just say that since you're doing that now, I'm going to throw in some of my own notes, and we don't have to go over my hate episode two times in a row.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Just feel free to interrupt me whenever you want to jump in on it.
I'll just interrupt you every 5 seconds. You suck! You suck!
well, at least try to let me get through the summary. And then once I get through that, we can argue a little bit. So I really wanted to pick an episode from season 7 that I liked, and this was really my only option.
Here we go. Three Little Pigs story.
My next line is the animated episode was terrible. A Slight Case of Murder was crap. I think that Jonathan's touching on that one, right?
Oh, yes, I am.
And not even Ewan McGregor could save Cold War. It was a rough season, but I really liked the episode. And I think when we get to my hate episode, I think that's when I sort of defend season 6 and 7, but not for reasons you'd think. So I really like this episode. James Frain, who I've absolutely loved as an actor ever since I saw him in True Blood, plays Elliot, a scientist looking for life after death who thinks his girlfriend Arian has stolen his research and plans on publishing without him. We open on the two of them walking through a very gothic-looking cemetery on their way to a very gothic-looking tomb with some science-y stuff and gear. Turns out all that gear is for an experiment in communicating with the dead. He has Arian put the headset on, and he cranks the volume to 11 and murders her with what I guess are the sounds of a dead serial killer's brain. And then, twist, we find out she stole his work to apply for a grant in his name, which he receives. This then drives him a little bit crazy. He spends some time in a mental institution, but leaves when flies draw a circuit diagram on his window. This must be his dead girlfriend telling him how to contact her, he thinks, and is off to create a new machine, which I guess is powered by 3 dead ladies. Like, they don't do anything except sit there and, well, we'll get to that at the end. So they're basically batteries. His new machine manifests his dead lover, and they proceed to do what lovers do. But all is not well. It seems this was all a plot hatched by the dead serial killer to come back to life. It was he who sent this information to Elliot, and he's come back through this gateway with his lover. Elliot then destroys the machine and sends them both back to some spirit hell realm. It's not super really explained what it is, but it's apparently a realm where this guy tortures people who end up there for all eternity. But we then cut to Elliot's friend walking in on him trying to figure out how to bring Ariane back again.
Played by Colin Firth's brother.
He had a lot of hair in that movie, or that show. But yeah, Elliot's lost all the knowledge. His friend takes his diary on the way out, and I assume reads all about the murders and the experiments and the grave robberies, and he calls the police. They find Elliot dead in a bathtub with slit wrists, looking at a heart written on the second floor window from the outside. Perhaps he's rejoined his love and defeated the spirit. Perhaps they're both being tortured for eternity. It's Tales from the Crypt, so it's probably that. They're being tortured. So if it feels like I rushed this summary, I did that on purpose. I rushed it because the episode itself is rushed. If this would have been a movie, it would have been great. They would have had time to flesh out the characters, give a little more backstory, and really dive into Elliot's obsession and paranoia, I think. That being said, I'm a real sucker for gothic imagery and Frankenstein-like characters, and this had both. And I thought, if something looks good, that's oftentimes enough for me. And I think that the cemetery looked great. I think that the tomb looked great. Those 3 corpse batteries and their flowing death shrouds and the way they did all the corpse makeup and just the white, it had a very sort of old movie quality to it, and the way they swayed back and forth when he activated the machine. I just thought imagery-wise it was very good, and I think the plot could have been good had it been given more time.
It's funny that you mentioned those effects there, because I gotta say, one of my notes is, this is metal. That's why Corey liked it.
I'm a metal guy. It's
metal.
I'm not really a fit. Have you heard the stuff I've been playing you? It's all analog synth, Maddie. Yeah, it's definitely got that whole Jacob's Ladder. Like, you can tell that if Marilyn Manson didn't exist, this movie would have been, or this TV show would have been filmed very differently. It's very much a product of the 90s industrial metal genre with the people moving all twitchy and too fast and that kind of thing. That's the one thing that really tears me on this episode is sometimes I like that. They did a lot of that in 13 Ghosts, and I thought it worked really well. I feel like in this it was a little bit trite and just there for shock value because they didn't have enough time to really give us anything else, if that makes sense.
Well, I actually had to watch this episode twice to follow the story. It was very unfocused.
I've watched it 3 times now. Just this week.
I mean, there's a lot going on in the episode, so yeah, like I see exactly where you're coming from in terms of when it comes in rushing the episode, especially when you read the Vault of Horror, the issue that it came from, there's a lot more details regarding that particular story.
Yeah.
So, like,
and I think you needed that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you try to fit those intricate details of the comic version to this episode, you wouldn't be able to fit it all in, especially when it comes to it being a half an hour episode.
Right.
So it definitely had to be cut down.
Yeah, I feel like the half-hour format works really well for most of the show because, I'll be honest, I'm a little lame. I prefer the half-hour format to the hour format because I just can't pay attention that long. But it didn't work for this episode.
Yeah, and I often don't have the time to watch more than a 24-minute episode. Are there other things you hated about it? I'm genuinely curious. Like, I see how this is a bad episode, but
I know you provided a very detailed description, but do you mind if I provide my description of the episode?
No, please. I'd love to hear it.
Okay. A scientist performing an experiment to communicate with the dead decides to try his luck with a famous maniacal cult leader, mesmerist, serial killer, what have you, accidentally kills his girlfriend in the process. He tries his luck again to bring her back and opens a door to the other side that he may not be able to close. That description is far easier to follow than the actual story.
Yes.
Yeah, you're right. I can't argue with that.
I mean, I do agree it is really cool at some points, like with all the jumping, electrified female corpses. But that shape...
They didn't jump. They swayed.
Okay.
They swayed.
That shape on the window and some of the CGI in this episode is some of the most painfully dated next to You Murderer. It looks really bad.
Yeah, it's funny that I'm defending the effects in this movie when I'm about to talk about You Murderer.
And, I love James Frain. I recall trying to give this episode a 3rd or 4th chance just because of that fact. But this episode just makes it, if you were to just pick this episode out and watch nothing else from that season, it makes it painfully obvious that the show was on its way out at this point. And you can sort of tell. I mean, it's even Crypty's intro and outro was a bit,
Yeah. Yeah, everybody was kind of giving up at this point.
Actually, sidebar, this season wasn't actually the final one.
Really?
The reason why the Crypt Keeper segments didn't seem like they were going out on an end note was because, especially with the third pig, because I was really upset by that segment.
So that was the final episode.
The third pig was the final episode.
The final aired episode, yeah.
Yes, but you would think that if it was the final episode, you would think the Crypt Keeper would actually give you on an end note, be like, this is the last tale or something to that right. Form, right? HBO had commissioned for a season 8. Unfortunately, it never happened, and it was they felt like the episodes were starting to get a little ripe, and they really couldn't do much. That's when the film started happening, and then once Bordello of Blood happened, with the whole BS behind that film, that's when they pretty much put it 6 feet under.
You want to go to a place real hot and sexy?
I know a place not too far from here where you can get the best goddamn piece of ass in the whole goddamn world.
Oh, man.
We need to do a commentary on Bordello of Blood.
I would love to do that. I'd love to be a part of that. And when I watch Bordello of Blood, there's that one scene where Catherine and Dennis Miller's character.
Just Dennis Miller. He's playing himself.
This is
he's basically a tired version of himself.
Yes, they're walking through that factory, right? And all of a sudden he makes commentary on the situation. He's like, "I'm getting some bad juju off this place. It feels like a bad Tales from the Crypt episode."
Huh.
And for that situation, based on the last season and whatnot, yeah, you could pretty much call it a Bad Tales episode.
Oh, for sure.
I love the concept of that sort of all being in the same universe, them trying to do a trilogy of films with that flask from Demon Knight. I wish it could have been finished at least.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Didn't you say that it came up in Ritual, but it wasn't actually mentioned?
Yeah.
Actually, no, it never showed up in Ritual.
Well, they in pre-production, I believe I read that they had planned for something. I don't know. Basically, they were going to do a different movie, and then they ended up eventually doing Ritual.
They did. Basically, the original trilogy was set to be Dead Easy, Fat Tuesday, which was actually changed and made into the second movie. Because if you watch Demon Knight, and if you watch one of the earlier DVD versions, you see a end credits Crypt Keeper segment, which he mentions like, "Oh, you're still here, creeps. You know, did you not get your allowance of murder, madness, and mayhem?" And then he mentions like, okay, well, be on the lookout for my next motion picture, Dead Easy. And then, that was supposed to be released a year later, but it never happened. And then, because there were production issues, and Dead Easy / Fat Tuesday was supposed to be like a voodoo ritual type film.
Gosh, that would have been so good.
Based in New Orleans, but it never happened. There were production problems with the script, and, eventually they scrapped it. Then Bordello of Blood happened. But there was also, the original 3 films were Dead Easy, Demon Knight, and Body Count. But Body Count was also scrapped. So then that's when they came up with Bordello of Blood, and then that's what we got.
At least we got Demon Knight.
True.
Yes, we got Demon Knight. But the overall connecting, link between those films was the key. But if you watch Demon Knight and Bordello of Blood, there's like a whole different set of rules, which is, to me as a fan, I think that's a huge issue as a problem. Because if you were trying to set up like a trilogy or like, Tales Cineverse, then, that key is your connecting link. So if you watch Demon Knight and you see the key, it has rules. It has rules to it. Then when you watch Bordello of Blood and you see its inclusion, the rules are not the same. So like,
yeah, and it doesn't even really matter in that movie.
Yeah, why does he have the key?
Exactly. So in the first film, in Demon Knight, you're told, okay, so what happens if the blood runs out? They bring back the darkness. That is coming straight from Breaker, William Sadler's character. Then you see Bordello of Blood. There's one scene which I'm pretty sure is just a cinematography error, a filming error altogether, where you actually see the priest, that gospel priest. He's holding the key in front of that, in front of his, I guess you can call his partner, and in his office, and you see the key is empty. It has no blood in it. It's completely clear.
Oh, Christopher Sarandon.
Yes, Christopher Sarandon. He's smirking and he's holding the key in front of him, and you can look at the key and it's completely empty, no blood in it. But then later,
I remember noticing that and that bugging me too.
Yeah, and then later in a scene where the key is destroyed, you would think, okay, the key is destroyed, therefore there's no control of Lilith, right? That's already present and obvious. But if the key is destroyed, that means there's no blood in the key. That means the darkness returns, right? So
right. Yeah, the darkness returns, or as some would say, the darkness comes back to retake their home because we took it from them.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
It was their world first. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean.
I'm sorry.
I got to do that.
When the best thing about your movie is Corey Feldman, you've got problems.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah, and Corey Feldman has commentated on the casting issues and the problems that he had with Erica Elienak and Dennis Miller. He did not have a good time working with them. He had a good time working with Angie Everhart, but he had a bad time working with the other two.
I do
yeah,
love
that
the
makes
actor.
sense to me.
I do love Phil Fondacaro, though.
I don't know who that is.
Oh, he was the assistant for Chris Sarandon's character, right?
Oh, the little person.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, he's great.
He was also in Food for Thought in one of the, I think it was season 5.
Oh, he was?
Yes, he was. But yeah, like, with the key and everything like that, you'd also think like, okay, so in Demon Knight, you had, what's her face? Jada Pinkett, her character, Geraldine.
Yeah.
She had control of the key, and, you're watching Bordello of Blood, and you're just like, okay, so what happened to Geraldine? Did someone get her?
Right.
Film that casts, Dennis Miller, a horror film that cast Dennis Miller. The script, it was the writer who really, really wanted him, right?
I don't recall
Well, I mean,
Al Katz. Al Katz was one of the producers and writers on the film.
yeah, with that in mind, clearly they don't respect the previous film enough to follow the rules of the previous film. So
Yeah, but of course that, like I said before, that came with the issues of the previous scripts. I don't remember exactly why they had issues. I mean, I have to go back and look at old Fangoria magazines that wrote up on Dead Easy and Fat Tuesday. But there were real problems with the scripts and why it wasn't getting approved.
let's move on to the last episode you hate, Jonathan.
Yeah.
I feel kind of bad that I took your hate. Now you have nothing to talk about.
My hate? No, trust me.
No, I took Maddie's hate.
Well,
Oh,
I
Maddie's
I
hate,
made her
yes.
talk about it early.
Hey, I said everything I hated about that show. That
Okay,
episode.
all right.
My worst episode was A Slight Case of Murder, which Corey already mentioned.
So bad.
Ugh.
I don't even think, unless you guys want a summary, I don't think I really would want to do it. But what do you guys say?
Just do a super short one. Like just
Yes.
touch on the ridiculous character beats.
You know what? Like, because I didn't like this episode whatsoever, to the point where like I didn't even want to watch it. So I'm just gonna go off my because I have the official archives book in front of me. I'm just gonna go off of that.
Right on.
All right. So coming from the official archives directly, Sharon is a testy mystery novelist who can't stand the bothersome queries of Mrs. Trask, her nosy neighbor. When Sharon's jealous ex shows up, she tries to toss him out, but he draws a gun on her. After a struggle, he knocks her out and buries her in the cellar. While he basks in his deed upstairs, the neighbor sends Milquetoast son over to dig Sharon out. As the son runs next door to get a gun to take care of her ex, Sharon comes alive and is bent on doing the same. All three burst in on each other with weapons and end up bumping one another off, much to the delight of the nosy neighbor, who had plotted the setup all along as research for her next book. Do I really need to go into detail as to how one person could just come up with all this intricacy or plan?
That's
Like,
what I hate the most about this episode is so much has to go right for the nosy neighbor's plan to work.
Right.
I'm all for suspension of disbelief. I'm a horror fan. I have to do that all the time. But stuff like this, it's just so like if one thing would. What if the husband, ex-husband, boyfriend, whatever he was, doesn't stop by that night? You know what I mean? Like, so much would have had to go right for her little intricate plan to work that it all just feels very contrived. It doesn't feel smart.
Yes.
Like, I don't think that the nosy neighbor is smart. I think that she's lucky, and I think it's unrealistic.
And they make it a point that she's a bad writer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she needed all this just to make a good book. So, like, everything that just happened in this episode was an algebra equation, right? You needed variable A, B, C, D, all the way to, like, let's just say H, right?
Yeah, exactly.
To happen
Not far off.
in order for you to get all this inspiration for your book. Like, come on. Like, I mean, I know it's a Tales episode, but if you have a man like Stephen King who can get inspiration just by looking at anything, you didn't need all this stuff to happen or even orchestrate it to try to write a book.
Right. And plus, based on everything that happened in this episode, her book's still going to suck.
Right. Like, you don't even know if people are actually going to enjoy your book, you know?
Right.
Well, on the one point, she stole the other woman's manuscript.
Yes, and
that's
mind
right.
you,
That's right.
mind you, her manuscript is actually, she's known for writing successful stories. If I'm reading a certain type of book, right, I know what the writer writes about, and I know what their pattern is like. Would I not be able to see that coming from another writer?
Especially if that particular writer was just murdered and they lived right by each other.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and the publisher probably has an outline of the book and some pretty extensive notes on said outline to give to the editor before receiving the manuscript. Yeah.
But it would have been a great twist if, like, she had opened the manuscript and it was all blank pages.
Dun, dun, dun.
She killed all those. She killed the original writer, and there's nothing in the damn manuscript. Like,
Would have been a better ending.
Yeah, it would have been.
the funny thing is the music that's in this episode. Chris Boardman, who's the composer, he actually composed the music for Bordello of Blood.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
It's like
yeah,
it was trying to give you an Agatha Christie feel, but it wasn't quite clever, witty, or charming enough to do that.
Shit, not even Agatha Christie would touch that mess. H.P. Lovecraft, Dean Koontz. No, nobody will touch that.
Yeah, when they switched production companies, they definitely didn't take writers along.
Not sober ones.
Right.
I recall that like they kind of went into the direction of going to Europe because they also wanted to touch on the Crypt Keeper's backstory of him being British, because he mentions in the first episode of season 1 that like he has a backstory, he has a family tree within the UK. So like I kind of feel like that's where that was going. It just didn't nail it.
I thought it was budgetary issues.
Budgetary issues were a factor. Yes, because like I said earlier, they were running out of steam with how to go about the Tales episodes. So that's how they decided to try to come up with something new for the show, and they went to Britain and the UK for their last season.
Mm-hmm.
What I would have wanted to, because remember how I mentioned that there was a season 8, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you guys remember the animated series, the first episode ever of the animated series?
I loved that show when I was 8.
Yes. So the story While the Cat's Away, basically details the Crypt Keeper going on vacation, right? And then he sets a flight up for Transylvania, and then he goes away from his mansion. The kids involved in the story actually end up finding his house and start exploring because they hear that there's a treasure, so they can get like a bike that they want to get.
Gosh, that show was so odd.
Yes, it was odd because of the whole PG rating and trying to dumb it. Not dumb it down. Try to make it more child friendly for kids.
Like the Sleeping Beauty episode was way too dark for a kids show.
I've never watched the animated series. I need to one of these days, though.
It's actually quite enjoyable for the most part. I mean, because like a lot of the tales that were not shown in the actual HBO series, they kind of adapted some of the tales from the comics into the animated series, which they're gentler and they're less violent, which was a problem for Kassir at first. But yeah, like they're pretty good for what they were.
Right on, I'll check them out sometime.
The first episode of the animated series, I would have wanted that to be the first episode of season 8's HBO series, because if you're ending season 7 with him being in the UK, right? Now let's just take the premise of the animated series first episode, While the Cat's Away. He's going away on a vacation, right?
Yeah.
So let's just say if we transferred that to episode 1 of season 8, we're taking it as, okay, there's a new tale that's about to happen for the first episode, and let's just say like a group of bikers or some kids end up discovering the Crypt Keeper's mansion, right? And
the set would be incredible.
Exactly. Like we actually get to explore more of the crypt instead of just being in the crypt. You know what I'm saying? And then at some point, the unwanted guests start discovering, maybe death traps similar to Saw, or maybe there's actual monsters within the crypt. And at the end of it, we actually see that they're trying to escape from the crypt and they're trying to escape from the mansion, only to be greeted by the Crypt Keeper himself at the front door when they're trying to escape. And, that's exactly what you see in While the Cat's Away. He would basically be coming back from the UK on his vacation, and then he sees people in his house, which I think would have been a great season 8, episode 1, to bring it back. That's me personally.
I love how we start talking about the episode you hate, and somehow we just ended up talking about the animated series.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. It's good information.
Great. I mean, there wasn't much else to say about that episode. It was just not good.
Yeah, it wasn't at all. I just went off on no whole other subject.
That's how we roll around here.
Yeah. Well, that's my episode.
Right. So obviously we're skipping over mine since we already touched on it.
Since I stole it. I don't know.
Is that something you guys do too? Steal each other's ideas and episodes?
No, I always feel like I have to come at something from a weird angle or defend the underdog, and I really felt like Report from the Grave deserved to be defended. That's why I picked it.
He just likes to, be controversial.
No, somebody's got to do it.
You should hear his lecture on Radu. Oh, you know what? Yeah. You know what? I know what would have fixed all of the episodes we hated today.
Scott Valentine.
Exactly.
Oh, for sure. But he would make it too good. Like, it would be a completely different show then. This episode would have been better if it was anyone other than Humphrey Bogart, but I will touch upon that shortly. I chose You Murderer, which may be one of the most universally disliked episodes of the series. Personally, I'm a little bit older, like I've said like 10 times this episode. So I remember when this episode was about to air, there were all these commercials and behind the scenes things about how they were going to use CGI and superimpose Humphrey Bogart's face and he was going to act again and blah, blah, blah. I was so excited. It was going to be a noir plot line. Like, it was going to be great. Because that was everything I loved as a teenager. Technology, noir, like all that stuff. It was going to be so cool. And God, was I disappointed when it actually came out.
What year was it?
It was season 6, 97, 96?
I believe it was 95 or 96.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was the last episode of that season, too.
Yeah, it was. They really thought this was they were ending it on a high note, and I think I know why, and I'll get to that after my summary. So this is a very Tales from the Crypt episode. It's full of love, murder, cheating spouses, and betrayal. Bogart's character plays a prison escapee who, did I even mention that Bogart was, yeah, I did mention that. Let me do this part again.
A dozen times.
Yes, we did.
Scott Valentine, portrayed through archive footage.
So this is a very Tales from the Crypt episode. It's full of love, murder, cheating spouses, and betrayal. Bogart's character plays a prison escapee who changed his face to look like Humphrey Bogart and goes straight by starting his own ad agency. So since Humphrey Bogart is credited in this episode, he's playing Lou Spinelli, a guy on TV who's playing a guy that looks like Bogart because he thought that would be a better idea than, say, having his doctor friend, played by John Lithgow, fix his face to look a little more average. It's not a good idea to stand out when you're on the run. Looking like a celebrity is probably not the best idea, but that's only one of the many problems I have with this episode. Speaking of the doctor, he convinces him that maybe it's time to murder his wife. This plot fails, and off Lou goes to confront his wife, Betty, because she calls him while he's in the middle of a meeting at his ad agency.
Did you know she never takes off her hat?
Yeah.
I didn't notice that because I was too
hating.
Yeah, I was hating. So Isabella Rossellini plays Betty. She's fine, but that doesn't matter because it's a bad episode. He gets to their fancy apartment and sees his friend lying on the floor. Turns out this was a ruse, and the doc was in on it the whole time because Spinelli's wife is cheating on him with the doctor. So their original plan is to make it look like a suicide. This fails, and a scuffle ensues. So Betty beats him to death with a statue that they say is a Picasso, but it's a terrible, it was really kitschy. I don't know if that was just a bad joke I didn't get or what, but it was an ugly statue.
Did he do a lot of sculpting?
I didn't think so. I don't know. Who knows? So yeah, this suicide plot fails, and they decide to bury the body and say he ran off because the law was catching up to him. This is when we find out that you keep your consciousness after death because Lou is still awake, completely alert, and is capable of seeing everything. Then, of course, the woman Lou has been cheating with, Sherilyn Fenn's character, Erica, shows up and knocks on the door. So they stuff Lou into a closet. This is where we see just how forced this episode is and the stupid shit it has to do to keep the action going. Since this entire episode is filmed from Bogart's point of view, they have the closet door creep open just enough so that his corpse can see out. Erica stands easily close enough to notice the corpse staring back at her, and and Lithgow's character is trying to, they're all nervous, like they're going to get caught, and they should have gotten caught. She should have seen this. It's just so contrived and unnatural. First-person POV needs to never be in another TV show or film again, unless they remake that scene was super cool. After all this madness, we cut to a remote piece of land where the doctor and Betty are about to bury Lou, and Erica shows up. She knew something was up and followed them in the most slow... she must have been in the slowest car or the slowest driver ever because they dug an entire 4-foot-deep grave before she arrives. She confronts them and she gets shot and she dies just before Lou's body falls onto the emergency brake and the car crushes Betty and Dr. Bad Decisions. The end. This whole episode is shot, like I said, in the first person from Bogart's point of view, and I assume because they knew it would look terrible and couldn't really animate his face as much as they'd like to with the tech at hand back then. Because the moments you do see his reflection talking back, his mouth's barely moving, it just looks terrible.
Well, he looks like a cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he does. He looks like a cartoon. And they really force the reflections, too. You see him in glossy tables. You see him in his flask, elevator doors, windows, and a few different mirrors. It's so dumb. In fact, at one point, when Sherilyn Fenn's at the remote gravesite confronting the Doctor and Betty, at one point, she actually has to move Bogart's head. So she's kind of turning the camera so it can see the rest of the action. It's just this weird forced part, and it's ridiculous. But I do have to give Tales some credit about this episode. During season 6, I'm pretty sure they knew they were on their way out. Viewer numbers were dwindling. Season 7 was going to a British production company. But instead of phoning their last season, and they did this a little bit with 7 too, which I liked, they experimented. They did stuff like this. They did the animated episode. Both of these were complete failures and were terrible, but at least they were experimenting on their way out. You know what I mean? Mm. And I don't remember, as awful as it was, I don't remember anything like this being attempted before. And who knows, maybe because of this episode, we have Admiral Tarkin and a young Princess Leia show up in 2016's Rogue One. Could have been.
You know, the only thing I can kind of appreciate about what they tried with this episode is that Isabella Rossellini, Ingrid Bergman's daughter, was in it. I mean, I guess that was a nice little reference.
Yeah, that is cool. So the only redeeming factor, other than the fact that maybe it was sort of groundbreaking, I don't think it was, but who knows. The only redeeming factor in this episode is Fierce Gump. I think Fierce Gump is actually one of the most iconic Crypty bits. Even though it's kind of sullied in this poor episode and this half-assed Alfred Hitchcock cameo, when people remember Crypty, I think they also see Fierce Gump, oddly enough. Yeah, so this whole Alfred Hitchcock cameo, I'm thinking that they might have run out of budget, and that's why he didn't make an appearance in the epilogue too, and they used a skeleton instead. But it was just so weird that he didn't even say anything. He was just sitting there, and he looked over at Crypty as Fierce Gump and made like a sort of confused, sort of scared face. And then they went into the episode, and they came back, and he was a skeleton. It was just ridiculous. Yeah. I think I would prefer... What I would have done, if this was my episode, I would have seen that the CGI wasn't working, and I would have been like, look, let's change this. Let's just use the guy with the green screen mask on and not explain it. Like, don't render anything. Just have this dude in a suit in a green mask. It would have been ridiculous, and it would have been funny, and it would have at least given something people to laugh at, as opposed to this terrible episode that we ended up with.
Well, I mean, have you ever seen Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid?
No,
not the whole way through. I think I've seen bits and pieces.
Well, I mean, Steve Martin made it work with all the black and white movie clips they used, and then occasionally you see him with a wig on. So if Steve Martin can do it, anybody. Well, no.
Oh, yeah, and I guess Star Trek did it, too. Star Trek Deep Space Nine did it.
They were trying to impress you with the CGI, and it just didn't work.
Yeah. It was a terrible episode. And I like experimentation, and I like that they tried something new, but it just didn't work.
Yeah, for what they were trying to do at the time, it was definitely appreciated. When I look back on it now, it wasn't executed properly. I mean, give credit to Robert Zemeckis. I mean, the guy did, Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I mean, that was a masterpiece.
That's the crazy thing. Zemeckis directed this, and this is a really good example of a Tales from the Crypt episode isn't necessarily going to be good based on the talent they have. You can have the best director, a bunch of really good actors, which they did. Isabella Rossellini, Sherilyn Fenn, John Lithgow. They had great actors. They had Zemeckis directing, and it was still terrible because the script was awful, the effects were awful, everything was awful. They didn't even need Humphrey Bogart for this script to work. It could have been anybody. It could have been a no-name, and it would have been just as, they just were trying to play on this gimmick that failed.
Yeah, and if you notice, throughout the entire episode, I mean, you mentioned that, like, Humphrey Bogart, like, is shown throughout any sort of reflection shot that you see, right? But then they were throwing out references to Casablanca or any other films that he was in.
God, and don't even get the taglines. Yes. They said, he was looking at you, kid. Wait, I counted it. I don't have it written down, but it was at least 7 times. They said, here's looking at you, kid, at least 7 times in that damn episode.
Exactly. They were really pushing it.
Long. Yeah.
They really wanted to push the fact, okay, check this out. We have Humphrey Bogart graphically put onto this head, and we're actually having Humphrey Bogart in our episode. We even did the same thing with Alfred Hitchcock. We are taking this dead person, we're putting him in a live Tales episode.
Yeah, this is the future.
Yeah, and we are going to push this guy and his acting career all over this episode.
Oh, and they really did, and it was awful, and it was so cringy.
It makes me wonder if they had different editing teams to do all the sequences with Bogart, and they had never watched it sequentially until towards the final editing processes, and then they watched it all in order and thought, oh, well, we're fucked. Let's just throw out a lot of ads and make it look like it's impressive.
That's happened before. It happened in an episode of Farscape where they filmed the episode and it was so bad that they gave it to the editors and was like, "Here, fix this." And they did this crazy, fast-paced episode that was actually not good, but it was better than it would have been had they just aired it properly. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe if they would have edited it differently. I don't know.
I personally think that if this, say for example, if the series was revived, I would want this episode specifically to be redone, because just thinking about it, like you mentioned Rogue One, right, where we saw Leia, young again, and they were able to make that happen. If you go back to, I don't know, let's just say Terminator Salvation, where they copy and pasted Arnold Schwarzenegger's face on a younger version of the T-800 model, attacking Christian Bale. That was really well done, especially because of the technology that we have nowadays.
It was okay. I wouldn't say it was really well done. I think that it worked in all of those things. You're right, it worked. But I think that if we would have concentrated more on those characters, we would have, just for the few seconds they were all on screen, we were already kind of looking into that uncanny valley where it looks real, but something in your brain is seeing that it's not, and it's just kind of creepy. Yeah. I think any more of that with the technology right now would...
Can you imagine how weird it would be for Humphrey Bogart to have seen this episode?
Oh, I'm sure he would have hated it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he would not. He would have been like, "You really took my likeness and you made this piece of shit?"
Yeah, exactly.
Like, really?
Paula Abdul's music video with the animated cat was better than this episode.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The animated episode of Tales from the Crypt was better than this episode. And that's a terrible episode.
But no, coming from me, I enjoyed what they tried to do with the episode. And after reading the story from Shock Suspense Stories, I just don't think they hit a good mark with this one. If anything, if I were to give it a 1 out of 10, I'd say a 6 in terms of graphic work, in terms of storyline adaptation, and in terms of the constant referencing of Humphrey Bogart. Mention it like maybe once or twice, maybe even a third time, but okay, that's
not
enough.
7 times.
Exactly.
That's minimum. That there were other references that I didn't get.
It felt like a student film. A student film composed entirely of professional actors, crew members, and everything. That's what it felt like.
Yeah.
You see in a college film class.
I can agree with that.
So, Jonathan, did you say that this was from a comic?
Yeah, Shock Suspense Stories. I believe the issue was 14.
Was the main character Bogart in the comic?
No.
Then why bother?
I'm telling you, it's a gimmick move. It was a gimmick move.
Oh, it was for sure a gimmick move. That's
and mind you, okay, go back to the 90s. Just put yourself in that 90s mind frame, right? At that time, you didn't have graphic work like that, where you were just like, oh my god, they're really gonna take the face of a dead actor, Humphrey Bogart, and they're gonna actually add him into the episode.
Yeah, I was so excited for it.
Exactly. So that's exactly why you watched it, right? And then all of a sudden, it was actually one of the episodes that was mostly viewed out of the entire series. It was one of those episodes, not only because Robert Zemeckis had made it, but also because it was a Tales episode. And then they also had that gimmick where they were like, we're going to reintroduce Humphrey Bogart into Tales. And then everyone was just like, no way. Granted, it got some ratings, but if you look back on it now, just like how we're doing now,
right?
No,
it was just too ambitious.
Yeah, for the time especially. You're right.
Now, if the episode had been about him getting plastic surgery to look like the animated cat from the Paula Abdul music video,
that'd be a completely different thing.
Maddie, something tells me after this, podcast ends, you're gonna go watch that music video.
I might.
Yeah.
So, to wrap up, do we have anything left to say?
I'm good. I'm actually pretty angry after that last piece. I've made myself angry talking about you murderers. So
I wouldn't say closing remarks. Actually, there is one more thing I want to touch on Tales, though.
Go for it.
The video game.
Awesome. Oh, yes, the video game, of course. All right, before we wrap up, now that we've talked about the episodes we love and hate, I would love to hear about the game that never was.
Yeah, I know nothing about this, and I'm a big horror gamer.
Okay, so I'm going to try to keep this as small as possible, but I mean, it requires a lot of information, though, so I'm going to try to summarize it.
That's no problem, and we'd love to bring you back sometime if that's possible, so.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So with the game, trying to make it a short story, basically the game was meant to come out in fall 1997. I believe the month was November. However, there was a company that was producing the game called Inkscape that was bought out by Graphic Zone. And unfortunately, the game never came out because Graphic Zone, the moment they acquired Inkscape, immediately declared bankruptcy. Yeah, and this is coming from Mike Vosberg, who was the cover artist for all the Tales episodes that you see. So every single beginning segment where the Crypt Keeper introduces an episode, all that cover artwork for comics, that's all Mike Vosberg. I spoke to him directly regarding this issue.
Oh, that's cool.
He tells me that there was supposed to be a video game. After getting more information from him and an anonymous source who, like in my video, I promised I would not put out her information, but she was supposed to be a producer of the game. Her husband was actually one of the graphic designers for the game itself. And it never came about. Once the bankruptcy happened, the game got canceled and got put 6 feet under, and everybody who was involved in the game and whoever was a part of building it and creating it never got a paycheck.
Jeez.
Yeah, so after all that hard work, I believe it started being made within like a year and a half or 2 years before 1997. So all that hard work that those people were making for this game was never credited. It was never put out, and they never collected a check for it.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah. So you could tell a lot of people were upset by that. Eventually, I came across this information. I saw Google searches involving like the synopsis after Googling Inkscape with Tales from the Crypt. I saw the synopsis of the game. I saw, pictures. But Mike Vosberg had sent me images that nobody had ever seen before, which is also on CryptTube before. I have 2 discussion videos on CryptTube detailing this entire story. The game was actually created so that you can actually interact inside the crypt. You can actually interact with the Crypt Keeper, the Well Keeper, and the Old Witch.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So you could actually explore the crypt, and you could actually move within the comic book pages of the tales that were included in the series or the game itself. So based on an interview that I read, one of the creators that was a director on the project stated that there was a level of interactivity that you can actually, like if you're looking at a comic book page, you were actually able to actually go up the stairs of an image that actually had the stairs. So you could actually go through the comic book itself and actually go through the environment that it was displaying in the comic book.
That's really interesting. They did have you played What Remains of Edith Finch by chance, Jonathan?
No, I never heard of it till now.
It's an excellent game. It's a walking simulator, but it's really heavy on story. And one of the stories is about a girl who gets murdered, and it's very, very Tales from the Crypt-like. But yeah, you do that at a point. You walk around in the comic book, so that's interesting.
I would really appreciate it if you send me like a link to that, because I'd like to take a playthrough for it.
Yeah, I will. It's worth it. It's a great game.
But yeah, back to the game. So you're able to interact with the Crypt Keeper. You're able to interact with the comic books. But here's the kicker to this game is that there is a revolving element around the 3 stories. You have 3 stories, right? But the main character is actually the character that's like a prologue character. So the artist in the game is called Killjoy. He's actually designing a comic book for Tales that has a due date on October 31st. He's working on the 30th. And he's trying to come up with the stories and whatnot and the graphic work for it. He's creating it, but he's actually getting sucked into the stories themselves. And you as a player, you're controlling each individual character for each story all around overall. Every single outcome of those stories affects the outcome of Killjoy, the artist who's making the comic.
Sort of like it provides you with different secret endings?
Yes. So in a way, if you compare it, it's almost like the games that you play from Telltale games. So if you played Wolf Among Us, or if you played the Batman Telltale game, it's basically like one of those games where, like, you know, every single choice or outcome that you make affects the ending.
Well, it sounds like a
I would have played that.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty ambitious concept alone for the time, especially, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and the graphic work was actually amazing, especially ahead of its time, because Jim Ludka, the guy who did the 3D design of the game, who's done Bad Way on the Midway and The Residence, this was ahead of its time. Like, you know, especially back when you had Sega Saturn and PlayStation running the graphics game back at that point, and, you know, you really wanted to get some in-depth 3D environments. Those are the systems to go to. But this guy went and designed this game on a Mac PC, and if you ever had the privilege of working with one of those computers back in school in those days where you had to work with a Mac PC,
oh my goodness,
you know, then, like, you know, graphic work, you know, for certain games wasn't really the best. But this guy designed Tales from the Crypt, and it looked like, I mean, it would look like a PlayStation 1 or PlayStation 2 game that you would play. And, you know, the story itself is very, very unique in terms of what kind of games we used to get back in those days, you know, 97. You know, you didn't get a game that was that intricate with story.
Yeah, that was like the age of Spyro and the Rugrats game. They weren't that complicated.
Yes, exactly. And the reason why I made that discussion video on that story is because I always felt like it was a shame that this work, especially because I didn't realize that there was such a huge story behind it. There was such controversy behind the entire thing where people weren't getting paid for their work. And then a man who had designed this game, I mean, he has it cited on his own website. By the way, he passed away a while ago, a couple of years ago. And the only mention that you have of this game is actually on his website, where you just see 2 images of the Crypt Keeper. You don't see any sort of video game footage. You don't see any sort of game shots that were received by, like, Mike Vosberg that he sent me. There's actually an intro that I came across on Google from a demo disc from Inkscape. Remember the company that made the game? The Inkscape demo for Assassin 2015 actually has a introduction cinematic for Tales from the Crypt the game, which I have posted on CryptTube right now. And
oh, wow. I'm watching that as soon as we're done.
That was something that I was very proud of finding, because I have been on this topic for, I'd say, a couple of months already, trying to find information on it and actually trying to find the actual game itself, which has never been released. And then all of a sudden I come across a eBay listing that this person has of a Inkscape demo of cinematic demos or video playthroughs or game playthroughs, and then it had Tales from the Crypt on it. So I basically have the only cinematic demo of this game that has been released, and I'm very proud of that fact, and I wanted to share it with...
that's so cool.
I wanted to share it with other Tales fans who had no idea that this was going to happen, and it makes other fans and people who appreciate the series and appreciate what the comics gave us, coming from me and coming from other fans, you know, this is something that we would have wanted. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, if Telltale Games were to acquire the video game rights to make Tales, we would go apeshit. Like, I would pre-order it the moment it's announced. Or if there's a Kickstarter.
And I'm not even a gamer. I would want it.
Yeah, and if there was a Kickstarter, I would basically put money into that every month because I would want to see it.
Yeah. Hey, do you think that other than obviously the demo you got your hands on, do you think there's a working, completed copy somewhere, even if it's just a base copy?
Absolutely. Because, like, after I emailed Mike Vosberg about this whole situation, he actually informed me that that the game was basically done and completed. The issue was getting it reproduced and distributed because of the bankruptcy issue from Graphic Zone. I personally believe that there is a working copy, or there are many copies that were never released, and probably they are stashed somewhere within Tales from the Crypt Holdings or Productions. The problem is that with the rights issue, we don't know how we can get this put out, because, you know, if HBO is not going to put it out again, or if FearNet's not going to put it out, because FearNet got, you know, canceled and they got turned into Chiller, or was it Chiller that they got turned into?
Chiller, I believe Chiller was just recently canceled.
Yes, and Chiller was a company that was a subsidiary of NBC Universal Group. So, like, we don't know who the hell has the rights to this franchise, and that's a complicated part. So now we can't get we can't get new episodes, we can't get a revival series, we can't get new films, we can't get video games, we can't see the Crypt Keeper until the rights issue is fixed and clarified.
I'm sure it doesn't help that so many people who created it didn't get paid.
Yeah, and that's another issue. Like, I would wish that, the game was put out that way the people who at least made the game can at least get some kind of, like, credit or recognition for it, get paid for their work. So, like I said, at first I thought it was just a video game that was never distributed, but there's a huge, huge backstory as to why it was never put out, and it's a shame how it never came about. Like, as a fan, I would think at first, okay, this is terrible because I don't get to experience this game. But when you read the stories, the interviews, and all this information, there is much more to it than just my own wants and needs about the game. It's, as a fan, and seeing what these people went through to make this game, I would want them to get that recognition. I would want them to get paid for their work.
Agreed. It's a shame when this kind of thing happens.
Yeah.
I would imagine that's a big problem with actually a lot of games because there's so many more people involved in creating a video game than just, say, a low-budget independent film,
Yeah, I think it was worse back then than it is now because video games are a lot more popular now, so there's a little more money. I think the problem now is people they finish a game, fire a bunch of people, and you still have a bunch of unemployed coders out there that can't make their games, Mm-hmm. But back then, I think this is probably not the only example of game programmers getting screwed over, and it's unfortunate. People deserve to be paid for what they do.
Even as an entertainment medium, it wasn't really respected back then either.
No, that's true.
Because and the funny thing is that John Kassir even recognized the game because when I tweeted him about it, he's even mentioned that he's done voice work for it. It just never came out.
Oh, wow.
So there were Crypt Keeper segments that were, exclusively made for that game that we haven't seen yet.
Hopefully in several decades when the copyrights expire for all these things, someone gets to see or play them.
Hopefully. If, as last I recall, John Kassir, he's also working on trying to get that rights issue taken care of because he wants sales back as much as the fans do.
Do you have any final notes about the game?
No, as far as I know, that's pretty much it. If anybody wants more information on the game, they can check out my discussion videos on CryptTube, where I give full in-depth analysis and explanations on the demo itself, the backstory. If anyone's interested, that's what they can check out.
All right. And if you want to check out the Hallow-Holics Anonymous blog, you can find us at hallowholic.blogspot.com or hallowholic.wordpress.com.
You can also tweet us at Hallow-Holics Anonymous at Nowhere23.
And you can email us at hallowholics@outlook.com.
So, Jonathan, sorry about this, dude. No hard feelings, but I'm going to ironically axe you in the face now.
Whoa. I didn't know you were qualified to do plastic surgery.